Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's interactive webinar from the Care and Knowledge Exchange, focusing on connecting care research to practice through collaboration. So my name is Nicholas Smith, and over the past 18 months, I've been living with and caring for my mum with Alzheimer's dementia on the New South Wales South Coast. Prior to taking a career break to care for my mum, I worked as a structural engineer, but it was through my carer journey that I was inspired to become involved in carer advocacy and am a member of the Care and Knowledge Exchange Steering Committee, and I'll be the chair of today's session. I want to start today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands that all of our participants are joining from today. For me, that is the land of the Dharawal people of the Yuin Nation. I also wish to pay my respects to elders past, present, and to all First Nations, carers and communities, including any joining us today. Please note that today's session will be recorded and shared for on-demand viewing. We ask that for the first hour of the webinar, everyone that is not part of the panel, please mute your microphones and turn off your cameras so we can focus on the panelists. In the second half of the webinar, everyone will have an opportunity to see each other and share their thoughts in our breakout room discussions. Today's webinar brings together participants from diverse backgrounds and areas of expertise. Our aim is to create a positive learning environment for all participants that is based on kindness and respect, where all perspectives are valued. You are welcome to add questions and comments in the chat throughout the session. To help us connect with you, a quick poll will now appear on your screen. We greatly appreciate if you could take a moment to respond before we begin. Thank you very much. So we've got a pretty good spread of people here today. Quite a few are carers, uni researchers, and then a number through the non-profit sector, a few university students, government departments and the service providers. So we should have a very fruitful discussion today with all of those in attendance. So the Care and Knowledge Exchange is a research translation project led by Carers New South Wales and funded by the New South Wales government that aims to provide outcomes for families and friend carers by connecting research to practice. The project brings together carers, researchers and policymakers and practitioners to share their knowledge and learn from each other. This webinar will explore how researchers can more effectively collaborate with carers and with industry to enhance outcomes for carers. It will run for 2 hours, including a short break in the middle. We will start with a panelist discussion featuring a range of collaborative research initiatives from the aged care, mental health, healthcare, and disability sectors. Following this, workshop-style breakout rooms will provide an opportunity for all participants to reflect on the panel discussion and share their own insights. Based on the panel discussion and outcomes of discussions in the breakout rooms, the Care and Knowledge Exchange team intends to develop good practice guidelines for researchers in the carer field seeking to collaborate with carers and collaborating with industry. If any of the following information discussed in today's session feels overwhelming, our chat moderator will provide a link to connect with our wellbeing officer, and please do not hesitate to take a break or step away from the session at any time. Thank you, Rose, for putting that in the chat. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Today, we are going to hear from Dr. Carolyn Lambert, Senior Lecturer at RMIT University, co-founder and co-convener of the Family and Research Advocacy Network, FARCRAN. Caroline uses her lived experience to inform research and teaching. Thank you for joining us today, Caroline. Next, we have Associate Professor Patsy Frawley. She works at the National Centre of Excellence in Intellectual Disability Health. Patsy specialises in inclusive research on sexuality, relationships and violence prevention, and has developed disability and inclusion studies programs. Next, we have Jessie Sutherland. She is a senior lecturer at the University of Newcastle, drives research, translation, equity advocacy, and carer-related collaborations, advancing scientific innovation and community impact through her leadership and diverse partnerships. And lastly, rounding out the panel, we have Dr. Nikki Baker, Research Fellow at ARIA, which is the Aged Care Research and Industry Innovation Australia Workforce Capability and Capacity Team. Nikki links research to practice for innovative projects, implementation and evaluation frameworks, emphasising evidence-based service delivery, collaboration and person-centred care. All right, thank you very much for that. All right, so we've got the panel here. We'll open it up with if everyone's allowed to jump in, carer is a term understood and used differently across different sectors, disciplines, and sectors. How are carers involved in or relevant to your work? Feel free to unmute yourself and jump in. Whoever wants to go first.
I can jump in quickly, Nick. So just introducing myself as a researcher at the Hunter Medical Research Institute based in Newcastle area. And my background is as a consumer engagement officer as well for the same space and area as part of New South Wales Regional Health Partners. So in both roles, carers come under the umbrella, I think, in medical research as consumers in research, and that's something that's really emerging definitely in the space that I work in and in the region I work in more and more. And it's really around that emphasis of having that consumer-led voice in directing and driving medical and health research. So that's kind of broadly how that contributes.
I might go next. Yeah, the word carer in aged care can mean many things. It can be the support workers, it can be the personal care assistants and so on that are part of the paid workforce, but also family and representatives of people who are older are also carers. And I think their voice is less well represented in the research.
So I might jump in next, if that's okay with you, Caroline, and leave your voice to the last one where you can really, draw us into your work. So yeah, I'm from the National Centre of Excellence in Intellectual Disability Health. I have a background working alongside people with intellectual disability in particular, and more broadly, looking at women with disabilities, sexuality, relationships, sexual health, and violence prevention. My work is inclusive research, so I've always worked alongside people, particularly people with intellectual disabilities, as co-researchers, and that means in the whole process of doing research. In relation to carers, in this particular role, and it's not new to me in this role only. I've worked alongside carers in very different ways over the years in different jobs I've had. But in this role here, the centre has, as I think it's really focused primary users and partners, people with intellectual disabilities, and it is stated carers, family members, and other supporters. So I think the word carers, actually, we always sort of add something to it. And I think in terms of people with intellectual disability, which is the focus for us, there's a recognition both that many people with intellectual disability live very independently and make decisions for themselves, but they've all come from somewhere where people have been in their lives. Some people remain to having people in their lives who provide care and support, some don't. But where carers, but we also see carers as a distinct group in their own ways, and in really important to partner with them to understand what is this experience and how do we garner that experience to get those incredible insights so that we know how to co-design all the work that we're doing here at the centre from that perspective as well. So thank you. Over to you, Caroline, I guess.
Thanks, Patsy. I was thinking, I mean, my work is centred mainly in the mental health space. And so I would recognise that the term carer in the mental health space is really dynamic. So it changes continuously. And then it's really contested as well by both the people who are supporting and those who might be receiving support. And also recognise it's very political, the term, but recognising that you can both be a carer and a service user is really important, I think, in this space as well. So, I mean, the definition that I often refer back to is from the Royal Commission into the Victorian mental health system that was fairly recent in 2021. I think the final report came through. Or looking at the Carer Recognition Acts, both the National Act and the Victorian Act as well. My current work involves several carer-focused and carer-led research projects. So I identify as family carer. I support people who experience things and feel things deeply. And I'm a co-convener at FACRAN, which is a family and care research advocacy network. And that network is Melbourne-based, but nationwide. I know there are FACRANers in the audience, so if you wanted to put a plug for FACRAN, if people were curious about it and wanted to join or just had questions, putting that the web link in the chat would be fabulous. So I'm just involved in advocacy for change through research processes, which are usually participatory, and outcomes that are meaningful for carers, right? And also through engagement with industry, it's really super important. That's me.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. Yeah, it's definitely a diverse and dynamic group of people, and it's really important, all the work that you're doing. So what have you found to be the main opportunities and challenges of collaborating with carers in research, and how have you navigated these? I might actually just ask Caroline to maybe start with this one, because it sounded like we're just sort of getting into some of the work that you are doing.
I'm just thinking, I tend to go for the challenges first, right? So there've been a number of barriers, I guess, in collaborating, not so much with carers, because the other thing that feels quite unique is that as a carer, I feel like we can be carers and researchers, and we can lead in this space as well. So it's not necessarily about collaborating with carers, but it could be around access, perhaps as well. But also it's more systemic or institutional barriers that we face around accessibility, things like payments for families and carers to be involved, reciprocity, giving up power, right? So we all talk about sharing power, but it can be really hard to do when it comes to the doing of the sharing, right? So they're just a couple of the things that I've noticed, but over to the other panelists.
I'd just like to add that, you know, one of the difficulties is who does the caring if the carer is involved in research. And so the time, the backfill in a formal sense, but, you know, if you're a home carer, who's there to look after? And that's one of the biggest barriers for us.
When I just might pop in and see, talk about an opportunity I think that I've experienced in my role here, is that we've found that many people who've come to us through our partners and collaborators, or I'll talk a bit later about the advisory group I've been working with, have come with other hats on, as they like to say, and then say, but I'm also a carer. And so I think that in our fields, I think that you do find a real overlap of roles. And I think that's a really great opportunity. But I also think one of the really important things is that people to choose which role they're talking, which hat they're talking under. And we certainly create that opportunity for people, as we do for all people that we engage with, because of course many people with intellectual disabilities have professional roles, etc. And yes, Amanda, I see on the chat, carers are really just carers, absolutely. And I do see that as a great opportunity for us, because we see overlapping experiences and depth of experience and critique as well, that I find really, really very valuable and insightful. Yeah.
I'd have to echo what Patsy's just said. And I think, yeah, it can be a strength, but also a challenge in like, what role am I coming at when I'm in this space, and identifying that is, and being really clear about that, because all we can ever really do, no matter who we are, is speak on behalf of ourselves and our lived experience. And so it's kind of, yes, you're part of community networks, and that's really important, and that contributes to that role. But I think being really clear on who you are when you're coming into that room and that particular role. And that applies to researchers and whoever is at the table. And absolutely what Caroline said about power dynamics are a huge issue, as well as the, you know, recognition and how that comes about depending on what systems you're working in, and learning that process. You know, it does take time, and there's sometimes that researcher language that we use is just not conducive to shared understanding. So those are kind of things that, when that time is applied and when you do this well from the beginning, that really, those barriers are overcome. And there's such a huge benefit of having that lived experience voice in any sort of health and medical research.
Thank you. Yeah, the time and the focus to ensure that, like I was saying, that the outcomes are really clear, and involving the carers in that process is really important. And Caroline, if I can go back to you, you talked about you have sort of carer involved and carer led projects. How do you ensure that the carers not only participate, but how do you ensure that they do take on those leadership roles, and what do you do around that?
Thanks for that question. I'm going to preface my response with I'm not entirely convinced that anyone can ensure anything, right, that it's ever possible. And also, it depends so much on how we're defining leadership. I'd say it's my sense that leadership in the carer research space can often look different. It can look collective or democratized or collaborative, more so than a traditional model of individual leadership. And so I'd also argue that leadership looks and feels different to each of us. There might be people that I see as leaders who mightn't necessarily identify themselves as leaders. And so while funding of carer research leadership positions is obviously a really great start, it's not always enough to facilitate that sustainable and safe change for enablers to occur. I'd suggest that we look towards enablers and barriers for carers to both participate and lead research across kind of micro, meso and macro dimensions. I'm an old social worker by trade. I often think in systemically, but on an individual level, you might look at sharing opportunities or inclusion for carers in your research. And that includes authorship. We've just done a study that showed that while the carers were often included in data collection, they were often excluded when it came to authorship. Noting also that what you might value as important as a researcher or define as inclusion mightn't be defined or experienced the same way for each of us. So I feel like there's lots of qualifiers, right? But the research process on an individual level should be participatory in design and methods, with topics for investigation which are chosen or which are identified by carers, right? Otherwise, often the research doesn't feel applicable. It's not translational to our lives. On a meso level, we might advocate for institutional or organisational policies that support carer leadership in research. And that might include those policies around equitable and timely payments. It's like the bane of my existence in a university, ensuring that the systems aren't so complex people give up. Creation of designated or dedicated carer research positions are so important. And things like challenging HREC, human ethics processes that are often discriminatory or infantilizing of carers. So that's kind of the meso level response. And then on a macro level, your advocacy or research might challenge the way that carers are often positioned by government policy or legislation. We're often positioned as free labour, the unsung heroes, the backbone of the economy, and that positioning has repercussions for carers. It means that often we don't have the time or access or energy to engage or lead research. We're just in survival mode, right? And I think it was Nikki who said that, if you're researching, who's caring? So research can sometimes feel like a luxury. I'd suggest also that holding and applying principles such as generosity and transparency and reciprocity to the people that you're researching alongside in the work that you're doing, but also remember to apply those principles to yourself, to be kind and inclusive and collaborative. It's not about academic humiliation or showing off. We're all imperfect people, right? Doing the best we can in circumstances that are often invisible and challenging. So just apply the same values to yourself is what I would say. I hope
Thank
that
you very
answers
much.
the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. There is just so much you do need to consider, and like you said, ensure, but try and at least promote or set it up for success going forward. You raised some really valuable points there. Patsy, so you're in the early stages of developing a new carer exchange hub. What co-design process are you using to ensure that the voices of carers are represented during that?
Thanks, Nick. It's actually a knowledge exchange hub for the Intellectual Disability Health Centre, the research centre. So it's not a carers knowledge exchange hub, it's broader than that. So it's a knowledge exchange hub really to look at the ways in which everything we might know, but co-designing new ways of knowing can be exchanged in a very accessible way, in an online way, about promoting intellectual disability health, promoting the rights of people with intellectual disability to be healthy and have healthy lives. And we recognise that that's a story that we need to be co-developing with all the people who've got the expertise and experience in that. So that does include carers. So our knowledge exchange hub is at its infancy, and that's really great, because what we've been able to say is we have no idea what it's going to be like, because we're co-designing it with the people for whom it's going to be something important in their lives. So we have carers, people with intellectual disabilities, and sector, so industry as well. And that really reflects the broader work of the National Centre of Excellence in Intellectual Disability Health. That's the way that we're structured. It's to be a centre driven by and framed by those relationships with those people that can, authentically shape what it is we're doing. So it's cross-representation, which I think is really, important and interesting to understand, is that we don't see co-design as one group co-designing something. In this regard, it's the groups that matter. It's the groups that are at the centre. And we really have prioritised carers, and we've prioritised people with intellectual disabilities in our first sort of starting point of developing that understanding. So we were really blown away by the interest and support for this work, and immediately we got 50 people on our advisory group. And as I said, it's cross-representational. I said earlier that people who are carers are always also saying to us, look, I've got this other hat on, but what I want to talk through today is this, and this is how I'd like you to understand what I'm saying. So that's been really important for us, for people to be able to self-identify who they are and what where those experiences are coming from. Another kind of approach that we're using is really, it's opt-in. I mean, it's broadly opt-in, as it should be. And I think sometimes I've done a whole lot of research, community-led research and participatory action research with people with intellectual disabilities, disability staff, support workers, government, all sorts of people. And I don't always see that opt-in thing is there. It's like, we need you. And that can kind of create the power that you're talking about, Caroline. So we're very clear it needs to be opt-in and opt-out, and that it's very flexible, and that people might want to be involved in broad ways, but they also might think, gee, that's something that I've really got an interest in, a particular interest in. So we're really also working around specific activities and ways of engaging, so that people throughout that co-design process can choose where they want to be in it, and how they want to be. And I know that co-design is a very co-opted word. It's also a very politicized word. It's also a very misunderstood word. So we're getting people to define for themselves, what does co-design look like for you? What's your bit in it? How do you understand it? And then how do we actually represent that? And as I said, for carers in particular, already I think the depth of understanding that we're getting about carers, so often carers are asked to speak on behalf of people with intellectual disabilities in their lives, and our centre is intellectual disability. We are mindful that that's important at times, but also mindful that people with intellectual disabilities have the right, and through our way, a platform to speak on their own behalf. So we also want carers to speak on their own behalf and create that opportunity to say, just talk about yourselves, just talk about your own experiences. Of course, inevitably that comes through experiences with their family members or the people they care for who have an intellectual disability, but what's it like for a carer? And recently we had an advisory group, and someone said, it was a carer, I want the knowledge exchange hub of our centre to be a place that I can come and talk about a carer without feeling shame. And that will stick with me, as it clearly has. And I think that speaks volumes about why we need these kinds of opportunities for people to choose to co-design what it is we're going to then create and have for them to be exchanging experiences and knowledge in. So I'm really kind of nervous, but I'm also really, really hopeful that this works, and that we are working using principles and approaches that are best suited to carers. I think flexibility, I think time, I think paying for people, All of this is really important, and I want to acknowledge that the care that needs to be taken of carers in these approaches is something that we're very mindful of. And I would like to say, if anyone in this group today has anything at all that you'd like to share with our centre around our work with carers, please do get in touch, because we are pretty new. And we're not a carer-focused centre, but we understand carers as one of our priority groups. So, yeah, so I think that, again, it's a bit of a journey that we'll do together. So thank you. Yeah, I hope I answered that.
Thank you, Patsy. And apologies, I said carer knowledge exchange. It's just a knowledge exchange hub. But yeah, that choice, giving carers that choice, as well as having that conversation with them, is really important. So it's great to see the work that you're doing in that space, and excited to see what comes of it. If I could go to Nikki now, talking about projects and things that people are working on, could you share how carers are involved in your current projects, and sort of specifically, again, the process that you use to ensure the voices are included and how their perspectives shape ARIA's work?
Certainly. So the priority for us is to build the relationships first. If you don't have the relationships, you don't have the trust. You don't have the trust, you don't have the good conversations. And so building the relationship first is the key. Second to that, two of our major projects at the moment are with the an Indigenous group and with a cultural and linguistically diverse group. And so cultural safety, cultural respect is really important. So understanding and respecting those cultures and incorporating that in the conversations. The invitations for a conversation at the outset and asked for their input with the design of the projects. And I think it was Patsy that says, you know, you talk with people about what the real problem is, and it might change what you think, you know, what you thought the research was going to be. It changes direction, it might change the scope slightly, but it's addressing the problem as seen by carers. We have had people co-author with us, and you know, opportunity obviously to be involved as participants, but in the project I was doing at the start of the year, you know, also the feedback that we got from them being summarized and sent back to sense check. This is what I think you're saying as a collective, does it pick it up correctly? So having that sense checking along the way before the final reports are done, and involving them in that as well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, love that thing about building that trust and that relationship and having them involved along the lifetime of the project, but also having that flexibility in the direction and really sort of potentially letting those carers help you navigate what problem you're trying to solve as well is extremely important. If I can talk to you now, I'm asking you, Jessie, what are some of the unique aspects of the health and medical research field? What are some of the unique aspects of the health and medical research field for collaborating with carers from your experience?
I guess it's what we've sort of covered in other places already around bridging the language and the technicality of research, and also encouraging, I think, and supporting researchers to work with consumers and carers and people with lived experience. And certainly in some types of health and medical research, that happens quite organically when it's quite translational and applied, and you may have been doing that already for a long time. But I also come from a space where we do a lot of discovery-based, heavily lab-based research, and sometimes it's really quite removed from that end point. And so just appreciating that there is actually a space to have lived experience in those roles as well. And two things I wanted to highlight, because we've been talking a little bit about co-design, was the Doing Research Together resource that we developed as part of New South Wales Regional Health Partners and launched this earlier in the year, and I believe that's in the chat and you can have a look at that. But essentially this is just a website with tools and resources about doing co-design together in medical research, and it's really great, and it really was developed with community members, with people with lived experience, with researchers, with health professionals, and we followed this user-centered design process all the way through and prototype tested it so that we have this kind of all-encompassing tool that we can access and use collaboratively to do these sort of projects together. And I think the key thing that we really worked quite hard on was the key principles for this. And I think just important for me to kind of point these out, because I think we've heard a lot of these be discussed already with the different panel members. And the 6 key principles that we have is working as a team, sharing decisions, valuing everyone's knowledge equally, building relationships, recognizing consumers and carers for their contribution, and being honest and flexible. So I think that really does cover quite nicely what we've spoken about to an extent, and there's a lot more detail if you go onto that website and have a look, and it's a great place to start if you're thinking, and that's from the perspective of a carer or a researcher. It's accessible to both, and the language hopefully is inclusive for everyone. And the second thing that I wanted to just highlight as well is around the changing landscape in health and medical research funding, which maybe some people, you know, in the session today have heard of and a bit more aware of, but really we're seeing a transition to supporting consumer and carer voices in how medical research is funded in Australia. And so our major funding body, the the National Health and Medical Research Council, has a particular stream of funding which there's a lot of money invested into that now, called the Medical Research Future Fund. And these funds are targeted calls, and usually within these applications now there's a requirement to have a consumer involvement statement. And so that's kind of where the research team needs to have truly thought about how consumers and carers are going to be involved in that research, and that's integrated throughout the project. And then the additional component now is that consumers and carers are sitting on the panels to score these grants. And so not always scoring, but also being a member and a spokesperson for those components of the grant. So I think those things are really changing that landscape and making researchers think more about how we work well and how we work together with consumers and carers as part of our research. But I think just being aware of that potentially as a carer is something that, you know, a way to be involved going forward too. So just something to kind of highlight, I suppose.
Thank you, Jessie. Yeah, it sounds like that's really great work you're doing with doing research together, as well as a great educational research that you can sort of disseminate within health to help upskill people that are engaging with carers. I'm sure, if I could just sort of ask you on the back of that, are you sort of using that as well to sort of help promote as well as educate?
Absolutely. And it's just it's interesting because I guess just talking about my 2 hats as the consumer engagement officer, this is the tool we developed and created, and really happy with that final product. And we looked at how we kind of mapped it to the research cycle. So thinking about before you start the research, when you're doing the research, like how you share the results. And so it covers all those elements and things to consider at those key stages. And then as a researcher, I went back to this tool with a recent grant application, and we'd had all these amazing working groups with people with lived experience. And I was thinking, how do I write this 2-page statement? And I was like, hold on, like I've got a framework for this. And it just fit and worked beautifully. So I think just actually developing something and then seeing it work in the practice, it was just kind of really validating. But I think that means that you know, it's serving its purpose, and it's going to be quite valuable, I think, for people to continue to look to as a future as this space grows.
Thank you. Yeah, and also interesting just about the funding and how important it is. It's sort of top down, bottom up, just the whole research and all the different sectors working together to engage with consumers, with carers, and ensuring that their voices are heard throughout all the projects and things that you're all working on. If I could just open up to everyone now, how does working with industry and sector partners enhance the impact of your research?
I might just jump in really quickly and say, I don't know if was that your little tentative hand? I want to say really quickly that it enhances it because it makes it translation. There's a translation element to it. It makes it impactful. You know, I think there's an average time of 17 years between the research being done and impact, right? But I am a firm believer that engaging with sector industry partners shortens that 17 years for impact, and it makes it so much more relevant for the target audience. So I'll just leave that there. Sorry, Nikki, you go.
Oh,
I'll
I
wave
think
my
you might
hand
be
a bit.
mute.
Yeah, sorry. I thought I'd clicked and hadn't. I was going to say that ARIA was established by the government to address industry, the aged care industry, to implement innovation and to improve workforce capacity. And so all our research has to be generated by, initiated by, thought by the industry. And so we can't do research without the industry. You can't get relevant or relatable or useful data if you don't involve industry and you don't involve the stakeholders. So yes, it's an absolute no-brainer.
And just, if I can add to that, I think that in my experience, you know, during broadly, I think is that it is about those collaborations and those partnerships. So I think that what's important is that we see it as a partnership. And I think that in my work, particularly in inclusive research with people with intellectual disabilities, it's all about the what I used to call the flat equal relationship. You know, that and one of your principles, Jessie, that everybody's knowledge is valuable, etc. And I think that in the past, perhaps there's been sort of a sense that there are different teams, you know, there are different teams. But if we're all thinking about the same question and the same issue, and particularly if we're hoping for transformation, social change, it's unlikely that we're going to have different teams. This is what the researchers think, this is what the industry think. What you'll find is different ideas across all those groups, and that, you know, not necessarily consensus, which is not what research is about, but different ideas. And that's what research is about. You know, getting access to these different ideas, really thinking about what they mean, and then really co-producing that knowledge so that it's not going to be something that's inaccessible. Knowledge that comes from this partnered approach to research has access right at the middle of it, because there is no point in there being an outcome that only the echo chamber of 20 of your academic peers will read and download. So I think that what I like to call the democratization of research and knowledge through partnered research is really also important, that we are always and right from the beginning thinking about how can we make this useful. And, you know, I love to see that so much as in the area of health and intellectual disability health has been about that really strong partnership, saying, well, yeah, we need the research to underpin the practice to change the policy. And so it's kind of it's more like a little helix. It just goes around and round. We're not going in straight lines. And we all are developing much stronger relationships about this. And I often say to people, being a good researcher is about being really relational in the approach that you have and understanding each other's perspectives. So that's kind of my take on that. And that industry is a broad term these days as well. Many people have their own industries, have their own businesses, particularly where people have had to become really sort of, experimental and entrepreneurial around things like being a carer and working, for example. So there's not sort of really straight lines often around those ideas of the teams too. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there anything you wanted to add to that, Jessie? Or I think you're... No, all good. All right, so I suppose just as sort of a final one before we go to the Q&A, and you sort of have touched on it, but if there's anything sort of more, if you want to be explicit about what opportunities do you see for different sectors and disciplines to collaborate more effectively to support carers? And we've definitely sort of touched on it. So if there's anything else you sort of want to highlight here with the work you're doing and where you see that can really provide a benefit.
Well,
I'd
I
just like
guess
to say, oh, sorry, Jess, I was just going to say the, you know, the Medical Research Future Fund research grants are a really great example, but also within the disability sector, there's similar sort of requirements around most of the research that's undertaken these days, is that partnership is important, and you know, you can't retrofit these partnerships to research. You can't think, oh, we've got all the great ideas and we're going to start developing the research and then we'll bring some people in for whom it's real, because, well, firstly, that has great big holes in it that you could drive a truck through, and anyone's going to see that, particularly if we have carers on these panels looking at it. So, you know, it's those authentic relationships, but recognizing that it's being seen as valued, valuable, and important. But also, I think within that, all of us being careful around not overtaxing, you know, particular people, you know, that and not those funds need to really learn about what it costs. And it costs in terms of payment of time and energy and other related things like maybe internet access and transport and accessing other carers, as Nikki said, who's caring when the carers are doing other things. So we need to push as a sector, I think, as researchers and people in committed to this, to get those opportunities reflecting the reality as well.
And I guess one thing I would just add, obviously Patsy's touched on the movement, I think, from the top down in supporting that. But I guess something that really made me rethink that lived experience is that we all have health lived experience. And sometimes we don't actually automatically associate with the word carer or consumer and, you know, understand our value or contribution that we might add in that space. So I think it's just about broadening that understanding and potentially also how we think about that lived experience. And the example I often give is we kind of talked about the time constraints that carers have when they're in a current caring role, but you know, it's potentially, you know, beyond the end of that period of time, you still have that lived experience. It doesn't go away. You still were that carer and you remember vividly all of those components and all of the things you did as part of that role. And at that point in time might be a better time for you to be involved and contribute this time. So I think just opening that definition a little bit more broadly and sitting with that, because in terms of the work that I do with people with lived experience, it's really, you can't really contribute when you're in the minute of it. Like, it's a lot to do, and you're already overburdened and overwhelmed. So I think it's kind of, once you've moved from that situation a little bit, it's kind of in the past, there's the space for you to have that capacity to kind of comment. And we need to be able to broaden that definition, I think, in the research and health and medical space, to kind of accept that, we all have this lived experience to share, and it probably doesn't really matter if it was 5 years or 10 years ago. Like, it's still really relevant and important.
Thank you. Was there anything, Caroline or Nikki, you'd like to sort of add to that? No. All right, thank you very much. So we'll just move on to some Q&A now. So we'll try and get through as many of the audience questions as we can. Those we don't have time for, we will share with the panelists after the webinar. So please feel free to add your questions and comments in the chat if you haven't already done so. So we do have one here from Maddie. To the panelists, can you speak to the role of ethics committees in ensuring research is rigorous and ethical, but also whether they can be barriers to research occurring in a timely manner? Example, paternalistic views or marginalised groups creating too many hoops, red tape. Yeah, Nikki, lead us off.
I'll start by saying ethics committees are there to protect participants. That's their role. And so the red tape and the bureaucracy and the protection for participants is there for a reason. And yes, it does take time to put in ethics applications, but if you are considerate of your participants and respectful of their time and their participation and what it means and how they're being reimbursed and so on, then I think the principle of the ethics committee being there is, if you think of it with the hat to protect participants, I think maybe there's usually a workaround that you can get through to get through the red tape. That would be my initial thoughts.
I mean, I would add, for my sins, I've been on a lot of ethics committees and chaired some of them. Yes, something's just popped up about the term vulnerable. You know, and recently I did a presentation about actually challenging the idea of inherent vulnerability in any person, but for me, particularly people with intellectual disabilities. And of course, it is the term vulnerable or at risk that will come up in ethics, and it's about moderating that risk and balancing benefit and risk. And that's the ethics committee's job. If the ethics committee, or there are policies or practices within the way particular committees have interpreted, like the National Statement on Ethics, there may be these attitudes, ableist, sexist, ageist, racist, that sit within the culture of that place or that committee that need to be challenged. And they will be challenged by very good ethics applications. In particular, they're not so challenged by bad ones. They're more challenged by really good ones, because really good, I used to say, a good research proposal is a good ethics committee, ethics application is a good research proposal. And if it's about involving people who might be seen as vulnerable or framed as vulnerable by particular groups or approaches in the co-development of that research, you will have thought through everything you've needed to think through. And not only from an academic perspective, it's from that collaborative perspective. So we've had research around very challenging experiences around violence and abuse and disability, for example, go through ethics committees because of the way in which we've done it together, and that it is about that risk management, yes, and protection, but it's also about advocacy for self-determination and for decision-making and autonomy and agency that you can do very well in an ethics application together. Yeah.
Well said, Patsy.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, it's definitely an important and great question from those attending today. From Maddie, thank you. I suppose following on from that, how can we ensure that carers from diverse and underrepresented groups, such as First Nations or culturally diverse communities, are included in carer research?
I'll go again. I'll start. So a couple of our projects at the moment are specifically with those communities, and it's about building relationships with them first, building trust, being respectful culturally, cultural respect, cultural safety is really important. How you go about the conversations, how you initiate the conversations, how you invite for the conversations, to set up those initial to get that initial understanding is really important. The business, the project, the research you want to do is secondary to that cultural safety and cultural respect first.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else have anything to add for that? No. Well, we're sort of at the time for the Q&A. So thank you very much for sharing responses to some of those questions. And I suppose just from those two conversations, obviously that cultural safety as well as those ethics processes, it just seems like these things take time and they need to be given the time to really sort of flesh out and build those relationships and trust to make sure that these are successful collaborations with all of the projects that people do We're now going to head to a short break, and during that break, we'll automatically be allocated to a breakout room. If you don't want to participate, you are welcome to decline the invitation that appears on your screen and stay in the main part of the meeting. Please note that breakout rooms will be recorded, but solely for reporting purposes. This part of the event will not be shared publicly or distributed to participants. Unfortunately, we're unable to accommodate changes to the breakout rooms or moves between breakout rooms. Please enjoy a brief coffee break or stretch and join us back here in 5 minutes. Alrighty, so welcome back to the main session. We'll just wait a few moments while everyone rejoins us from their breakout rooms. I apologize if my internet goes down again. Please remember to mute your microphones and turn off your cameras so we can focus on the key takeaways from the breakout rooms. You're welcome to add any additional thoughts in the chat. We're now going to hear from our facilitators and scribers about the key points that were discussed in each breakout group. So if we can please start with Hugh from breakout group 1.
There we go. I was having trouble unmuting. We had a great little group that covered both carers and people who are involved in a range of project facilitation roles for research. We covered probably 3 major themes I was going to quickly talk to. One was the change post-COVID to meeting and doing research online, and just some of the challenges around collaboration, which were around differential access based on carers perhaps who may have a disability, difficulties of writing information into chats, digital divides, and certainly barriers around regional access to technology. And also having perhaps the person being cared for at home, which can create some issues around research participation and the privacy of responses. So just being conscious of all those factors in terms of the evolving trends in how that research relationship is playing out. We also spent a bit of time just talking about what motivates that relationship, and essentially what motivates carers to participate in research. And we talked a little bit about opportunities to build in co-development of research questions at the start of the research process, being able to communicate that the research will lead to actual change post the conclusion of that project. So talking about perhaps past projects that have been conducted and how that actually led to tangible outcomes, and directly communicating that to future participants when the offer letter goes out. We also had a bit of a conversation around remuneration and opportunities to pay carers for their time and the costs of participating in research, and what researchers can give back in relation to skills-based training, and just recognising the opportunities that or the skills that have been developed through the carers role, and maybe codifying them in some way that can also provide a benefit to carers. Okay, I think that was probably it. We had lots and lots of things that we talked about, but I do want to give people the opportunity to feedback as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Hugh. We'll now move on to Grace from breakout room 2.
Thanks, Nick. I first just want to begin by saying that everyone in our group was very generous with what they shared about their own lived or living experience. So I do want to just begin by recognising that. But really, our conversation really centred on the fact that research or avenues where carers share their story should be closely connected to advocacy, both on the individual level where problems or concerns can be addressed or solved, but also on that systemic advocacy level where outcomes for all carers are also improved or addressed by carers sharing their story. And we also had some kind of conversation really around power dynamics and and how carers should be supported to first participate in research, but also that broader carer support piece where without that adequate support for them in their caring role, it makes it difficult for them to participate in these kind of activities.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We'll just move on to the next breakout room, which was Alex, breakout room 3.
Yes, lovely. Thank you. And also just want to say that thank you to everyone in our participating room for your generosity, for sharing all your ideas and thoughts as well. It's going to be a real struggle to keep this under to keep it within a minute, but I think the 3 points that we came up with, first one was around transparency, and there was a great discussion around carers potentially losing the control of the narrative, which causes distress for people, and also to be able to communicate the purpose of the research very clearly as well, but also to address, which links to what Caroline Lambert was saying about addressing power relations during the presentation, but both during and after the research. So talking about how the research informed policy. Another point that we talked about was to understand who the research is being done with, which informs how the engagement and promotion methods are going to be done. So is it going to be through face-to-face or through technology, and where to engage them? Because a discussion point was about the place where the location where the research is going to be taking place. Some people may find it difficult to get out, so there might be a level of reaching out to them, and also important to not assume what people want based on their demographics. And finally, quite a discussion around flexibility. So place once again, but the mode, technology, and also the extent to which people want to participate. There was also a really good point about people, carers potentially feeling like they are responsibilized, the word that was being used. So did people join in because they feel obliged, they feel like they have to participate? So it's really vital to have that upfront discussion with them. So yeah, once again, thank you to our group.
Thank you very much for that summary from your breakout room. If we can move on now to Karen from breakout room 4.
Hi, sorry, again, I had a bit of a problem with the mute button. I just want to say thank you, to our group as well. Really rich discussions, very honest, genuine. So it was really great insights was gathered from that. And so a lot of the discussion was around carers actually being recognised for their skill set, not just particularly as carers, but also their lived experiences, but also what else they bring. So it's actually, that having that shared understanding of where everybody is coming from right at the start. And again, the early engagement as well was really encouraged, and time to build relationships and skills, and sharing those skills and relationships across between carers and all the researchers and the industry and sectors, and to help building the trust and transparency of the whole process. And some of the things that were talked about is that, some people have had some very challenging experiences, and it's really important that they have got some bridge on how to build the trust in these, and so that there's better experiences with the different industries and sectors and research. And we sort of talked about having that key person or key organisation that can act as that bridge to make sure that trust is built. And I hope I'm sort of sharing this all well. And again, we talked about that power dynamics, making sure that they're equal partners. They're considered as part of, if there is any publications or presentations, that they're involved in that. So their names are there. They're actually active participants. And also the training of the industry and sector as well around engaging with carers. But one of the big things I suppose that came out was that actually having developing clearer guidelines about how each sort of area works together, so that there is more transparency. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Sounded like a great discussion. And lastly, we've got Melissa from Breakout Room 5.
Hello. And I just wanted to similarly thank the people in our breakout room for sharing their experience and their insights. We also had a great discussion. In terms of what we talked about, we discussed the need to be broad and flexible. So ensuring that you're including a large range of carers, I guess, not having biases, or ensuring that you're inclusive of other carers who are not the primary carer, and how they can be captured and included in research and study. Similarly, the flexibility of just meeting people where they're at and within their own availability, time, location, depending on their needs. We also had a discussion similar to many of the other groups around partnership with carers, and this could be kind of facilitated through transparency on behalf of the researchers, as well as being informed about carers' experiences going into the session. We talked also a little bit about the power dynamic and how frameworks like choice and control especially can sometimes position carers in a certain way, or change the way that carers are approached in terms of engagement and the way that their opinions are captured and kind of presented, and concerns ensuring that carers are feeling safe in those spaces to be able to share, and that there won't be negative outcomes of that. And just I think the other thing that we had talked about was also just in terms of, we did also have a brief chat about effective collaboration with industry, and just the importance of engaging carers and consumers in that and having them at the table to ensure that it is actually effective.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts, experiences and ideas, and what incredible in-depth discussion we've had on how diverse research initiatives can work together to improve the outcomes for carers. As we move forward, we'll kindly ask you to take a few minutes to complete the poll appearing on your screen. And your feedback is valuable and will help us improve future CKE events. Thank you very much. I think we're pretty, thank you everyone for responding to that poll. So yeah, having heard from the breakout room insights, we'll now turn our attention back to the panelists for their final reflections. So I'll just throw it open to the panel regarding what is one key or last piece of advice from your experience that should be included in the Carer Knowledge Exchange guidelines on carer and industry or sector collaboration. But Caroline, if you just wanted to lead us off, because I can see you there front and center.
Sure. I think the first thing I'd say is that the answers don't lie in the panel. The answers will lie in the audience and the folks and the carers who have participated and who'll be listening to this recording. I might say that dialogue is always the way for change is always through dialogue, and consider also using values or principles that the other panel members talked about today as well. They're probably the things that I would lead with.
Thank you, Patsy. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Caroline. Look, I think for me, it is all about the relationship between researchers and others and carers. And, if guidelines are going to be developed, I think co-developing guidelines is a really good idea on co-design and collaborative research. And really also thinking about how that's understood within the research context and what we know, like works in research. So cross-referencing that with, maybe some of the literature about collaborative research and inclusive research, partnered research, and thinking about how that might then, add some of that information to what you're proposing that will also stand up for grant applications and those kinds of things. And I think it's about also recognizing that this is an evolving area. I think, Caroline, you said that before, and being flexible to be able to constantly sort of and continuously reflect on those positions, particularly with the carer population.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Nikki.
I think the one thing I'd take away is the relationships, but being respectful of people's time, people's expertise, people's lived experiences, and you know, the costs involved with participation. I think the word respect hasn't been used so much today, and it's the one thing I think I'm taking away from the discussion and the conversation. You know, the research, if it's led by industry, it will address the industry need, but from a consumer and carer perspective, being involved right from the start in the design and all the way through the journey, and being respectful of that, I think is really important.
Thank you very much. And Jessie did have to hop off. So yeah, I suppose to make sure that you are notified about the next steps and receive the recording link, make sure you are subscribed to receive Carer Knowledge Exchange email updates. The subscription link will be shared in the chat. Don't forget to explore the Carer Knowledge Exchange digital platform. There you can browse or share carer-related research, publications in our research library, and watch short presentations from the Spotlight series. The links are available in the chat. If you are a carer participating today, we also want to communicate to you that your well-being is important, and if anything discussed today has been upsetting or you need additional support, some support information has now been shared and shown on screen. So thank you all, both the panelists and the participants, for your contributions in the breakout rooms. And I would like to bring this webinar to a formal close and thank everyone for attending and participating today, especially our panelists and carers who took the time to join us and share their insights with us. Thank you once again, and we'll see you next time.